Welcome to our series titled Syahi, Writers on Writing, presented by Azim Premji University. In this series, we bring renowned and accomplished writers who will talk about their writing journey in the hope that you will find a nugget or two to start your own writing journey or refine the process if you're already writing. And we begin this series with Professor Harini Nagendra. Harini needs no introduction, yet it is my privilege and great joy to introduce Harini to you. Harini's research career spans over 30 years in the areas of forest conservation, urban sustainability, the interlinkages between sustainability and conservation. She's won several awards, accolades in her relentless effort to contribute to the conversations that are very, very important for us to be having today in forest conservation and preserving our very rich environment. Harini, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure. Looking forward to this.
I am very excited about this interview and I'm going to jump straight into a word from one of your books, Murder Under a Red Moon, the word Baindangul. So I haven't used that word since my childhood days, and we used it quite a bit when we were at play as children. And I just want you to tell us how you decided to use the word Baindanguli in the book.
So I'll have to start with a little bit of longer history. In the sense, when I started writing the series, the Bangalore Detectives Club series, I was thinking I write in English, but obviously Kaveri and the Bangalore Detectives Club ladies would have been talking in Kannada, but a mix of what passes in Bangalore even today. Right? It would be English with a bit of Kannada, a bit of Telugu, a bit of Tamil, maybe some Malayalam, bit of Urdu, Dakhani, everything thrown in, right? And so I wanted that flavor. And the first time I started writing it, there was this very innocuous word, lathi, which is very, so I said lathi with a bamboo stick. And the first editor who was doing this, and these are edited in the UK, kept saying, can you remove this and say bamboo stick? And I did that. It looked really awkward. And then I was thinking about the Latin American writers I know well and love, and even German. You just use a German word or a word in Spanish or Portuguese, and you assume that people will understand. And people understand. So I said, no, I'm going to do this. And we decided on Kaveri's glossary, which we have at the back, which explains these words. So in book one, a lot of my favorite words are already gone. So in book two, I was thinking, okay, I want to add a few things. And I remembered when we were kids, again, one of my cousins arguing with another one who didn't want to do something, I don't know, play with a ball or something that he was throwing around. And he said, you're a Baindanguli. And she burst into tears. And I said, okay, Baindanguli, this is the word I'm going to use.
And it was beautiful, right? You're talking about a Great Dane in that scene, and then you're imagining this very majestic, beautiful creature, and then you throw in this word quite beautifully and say, this is one Baindangoli. And it's so natural, the language in it. And that's when I started thinking about how you think about writing itself, right? Perhaps we'll begin with questions around that, which is, how do you write? I mean, do you have a way in which you begin writing? Do you start at the break of dawn? Is it at the dead of night? When do you start writing?
Nothing systematic like that. As you know, I mean, so the day job here is completely crazy. It spills over into evenings and weekends. So I have a very nicely scheduled plan when I start writing. It's usually a 2 to 4 month period when I do the first draft. And so that might be I start sometime in November. It might be November, December, January, February, or December, January, February, March. And the plan is always that I will write 2 days on weekends, a couple of hours, and another 2 days in the week, I schedule either early in the morning or late at night. The thing is, day job, academic job is always about academic writing. There's always some writing in the day, right? And that writing is very structured, 2-word count, linear. And I find if I do that, it ruins my capacity to do this free-flowing, imaginative writing. So I have to do it either early morning or I come home, take a break, and it's late night. Now that is the theory. In practice, I have a teenager, I have an 88-year-old mom, and I have other stuff going on at home. And so it's actually madness when I squeeze in time. But then I'll squeeze in time, and then somebody will open the door and ask for something, and you suddenly take it out of 1920s Bangalore and back. So it's really where I squeeze in time.
And that's, I mean, you are genuinely a busy person, and to be able to make time, and the thing that you often hear from people who want to start writing is that I don't have the time, right? So if you were to give a certain set of recommendations to people who think they cannot start writing because they don't have the time, what might you want to say?
Two things. One is, I think, so there's two people who have influenced me greatly if I think back. One is, so my friend's grandmother, she was Honnamma Govindaya, and I've written her about her in one of the books. She passed away recently at 97 or 98, but she was a Gandhian who saved a park in Bangalore from being taken over by land sharks. Mother of 10 children, husband passed away, raised them single-handedly, did everything, swam, did all her own housework, went and fought with the government, took a case all to the Supreme Court. And she told me once, I said, how did you manage to do all of this? And she looked at me and said, Harini, if you really badly want to do something, you'll find a way, won't you? So that was one. The second is Robin Hobb, which is my favorite writer of all time, who does this fantasy series, but again had 4 kids, was most of the time single parenting because her husband was out. And I listened to a lot of her videos and things where she said, so she writes, she says, you can write anywhere. You're in the laundry, your mind is writing. You're watching the kids, your mind is writing. You're doing the housework, your mind is writing. So I do a lot of my writing when I, let's say, go for a walk, or I'm traveling to the university and back, and I'm thinking through plot points. Somehow you have to find the time. And I think that's the thing. If you really want to finish, you can find the time. But the second thing is chunking it. My challenge is, especially with the fiction writing, I'm not a plotter. I can't plot. It's character driven. The characters get on the page, they do something, then I know where the plot is going to go next. That makes it harder. If I was a plotter, I could say neatly, chapter 1 this day. It doesn't work like that. Some days I'll sit there and I write complete garbage and have to take the whole thing out. So, but scheduling the time, that small chunks. If I have a half an hour, a 1 hour, anything less than 45 minutes actually doesn't work because I'm going back to the 1920s. But 45 minutes to 2 hours is my chunks. And I somehow, if I can carve that chunk out 2 weekdays and then the weekends are fine, then I'm okay.
Right.
Just that.
I read somewhere that John Irving said that he begins his story with the last line. Do you have?
No, I have no idea where it's going. I never know. I kind of know who's getting murdered. That also changes sometimes, the first murder. But then I have no idea who did it. So I really have to write my way through that whole thing.
Amazing. And which also then gets me to the next question. You write serious scientific material, you're writing non-fiction, you're writing fiction, like a whole variety and range of writing, right? How do you do that? How do you? So maybe I'll ask you this question, which is, do you think writing is difficult?
For me, the non-fiction has never been difficult. It's always been easy, a joy. In fact, it's an itch, I would say. If I'm not writing after some time, I feel that urge to write. So it's a real pleasure. The fiction is also a pleasure, but to get to the pleasure point, I have to go through a lot of pain and, nervousness. Because every book I think, okay, this is really not going well. This is terrible. Why did I ever think I could write? This book is going to be rubbish. And I have to push the panic aside till I get to the quarter-way mark. Then it becomes a pleasure.
Right. And again, with each of, I enjoy Shades of Blue tremendously. And there are certain phrases and metaphors that you use throughout, you sprinkle that throughout the book. What stood out to me at the very start was you call our relationship with water somewhat schizophrenic, right? And I was thinking, wow, what a way to present a relationship, for a community of people that need something on a daily basis. And then I was wondering, okay, there is also a certain amount of creativity you're bringing into your nonfiction as well. And how do you manage that? How do you?
Has to do so, and because Shades of Blue and Cities and Canopies are with Seema, and that's a long writing relationship. We've been working together for, I don't know, more than 10 years plus now. That is something we evolved through conversations. Initially, I would say Nature in the City, which was the first book, even though I thought it would be a crossover book, was much more fact oriented. And then we started, when I was talking to people, I realized what the facts did was it brought to mind certain personal experiences of theirs and then the emotion. And then Seema and I started sharing stories about our favorite trees, or what moved us, or what do we remember. It was something like climbing a tree, or eating mangoes on a tree, or rubbing your hand against the bark of a tree, or toes in wet grass, or something like that. And then we said, okay, how do we bring that emotion alive into our writing? And that I found people connect with much more. And frankly, for us, it was very enjoyable. So that's where we started doing this. And that's been a learning journey.
And again, in all your writing, you blend history into what you write. And on one level, it's a very serious act, right? If you look at your nonfiction writing, the kind of history one is looking at is so rich, yet there's a certain kind of angst that is attached with losing that kind of history. And then you have the history in your fiction, which is tremendously enjoyable to think about a heritage, to think about what the city was built on. How do you think through those kinds of associations?
So I started with history. It's interesting. I didn't have was not interested in history growing up because our textbooks were bad. They were taught badly. I was just a series of dates one had to memorize, and I hated history, and I thought I was escaping all of it. Then I started the Bangalore work, and I found, actually by accident, I had a couple of maps, and I love maps, so I started with that. And I found maps were a very good hook to draw people in. A challenge always with writing about ecology is the people who are interested and care about the environment care about it. And the people who don't, which is a vast majority, they like a nice tree and a nice lake, but it's not really, the environment is not figuring in their consciousness. And so, how do we connect to them? Then I realized it's history that is bringing them because everyone wants to know about their past. And then I started thinking about history very differently from the way we were taught history, at least in school, right? So, okay, what's the fun part here? What do we want to know about how people live their lives? And then you're right, a lot of the stories about lakes or trees and the ecological history is a lament of glorious past lost with some indications of hope. We're trying to see how can communities restore lakes, protect trees, all of those things. But for me, 1920s Bangalore is such an escape. So Sharon, I mean, if I'm really, it's a bad week, the news has been so bad, you see things deteriorating or you're stuck in traffic, then you escape into this lovely 1920s world. The lakes are, shining, the sun is out, the trees are there, Kaveri is listening to the birds singing, and the grass is green, and there's lal
And it's
bus.
not even an imagined one,
No,
right? It was one that we
it
all
was,
grew
yeah,
up
we
in.
all grew up, right?
We grew up in. And again, in the Nest of Vipers, you bring in the circus, right? Every summer, if anybody who's lived and grown up in the city, it was something every child looked forward to, right? The special seats. You even talk about the red carpet and the gentleman in the turban. Those are all things that all of us grew up with, and such excitement around that. So, in your writing process, that refinement of touching memory, manner that's so personal, how do you go into that? Because to me, it would seem that you do a lot of research in all these aspects. Then, how do you bring that raw research into something that's
So I start usually, an opening incident is always something that happened in that place. So for Murder Under Edmund, it was the dog and pony show, which is where the ugliest dog show was there. I actually looked at the archives and there was something about the ugliest dog award, and I thought this I have to start with. So that was perfect. Again, with the prince coming, I said, what do I start with? And there was the circus had come to town, so there was a description. So that part would be fact. Then I start thinking about what would make that interesting, and then I draw on personal memory, or often it would be something, conversation with my mother or an aunt or someone else, where they're talking, trying to recreate times. And then it would be something like this, like the circus. I started with what would the circus be, and then I did a lot of research into the Indian circus of those times. So there were women and there were men, and all of the theatrics, and then the whole issue, which is close to my heart, about how did you get the tigers into those cages and actually stick your mouth into there? In what were they drugged? How were they being treated? All of that, the animal rights stuff. Then there was the whole issue of the way Indian magicians were being exploited by the British. So they would take all their acts. So Harry Houdini and even Charles Dickens dressed up in blackface, and they used to pass themselves off as Oriental fakirs. So Charles Dickens, obviously not for commercial benefit, but for children's birthday parties. And he would dress up as an Indian magician. But Harry Houdini was actually exploiting this. And at the same time, they were writing articles, Houdini and a couple of other magicians, dissing Indian magicians as these half-baked, these charlatans, and these guys who have cheap tricks. They were taking the same tricks and exploiting them. So there was that whole element, So there's a lot of research that went into all of the circus, which was great fun. But then I drew on my memory. All these seats, the whole excitement. There's always this frayed looking red carpet that was there, which was very exciting. Somebody would roll out. There was that smell of wet tent and little mold and a little bit of grass and earth. The mud would swirl up and stick to your shoes. And somebody's hair oil in front would make you sneeze. So those memories have to come in, right? There's the research, but then you get yourself into that context.
I think you say that too in the book, right? In a narrative where the magician is saying exactly this, that how they're dissing Indian magicians. I could see that, okay, this came from some part of history that you perhaps read. So if you're thinking about the writing process itself, right? And it's often said that writing is really 20%, editing is really what is in good writing. How do you go about editing your work?
This has been the part that I'm always learning. So my process, I'll tell you, and I'll tell you how the process evolves. So the way I do it, I do this rough draft, and because it's a discovery writing, really, so it's something that I don't know what the end is going to be. So I write this draft, and there are a lot of inconsistencies. A character will suddenly do something different in the second half, and I make a note to myself that you have to go back and change this. Or a new character pops up, but I have to create the first part where they somehow woven in. They don't appear out of nowhere. So they were all, so I then go back and fix these really messy drafts. And then my first beta readers are my husband and daughter, who've been there through the story, and they're usually there for. So it's different. With my husband, I'm usually brainstorming difficult plot points if I'm stuck. With my daughter, she likes to read it new and tell me if it's, exciting enough or scary enough or unexpected enough. So I rely on her for that. So they're doing very different things. He's looking at logical inconsistencies, and she's looking at it as a reader of fiction. He's not a reader of fiction. He's a reader of non-fiction who will never normally take a book like this. So it's very different. But between them, they bring a very nice, I think, complementary set of eyes to it, and often very funny comments because they're brutal also, and you want someone brutal in a very loving way. Yes, right. So I get that. Then I keep that distance. So usually then it's between that first draft, I give it to them, we talk about it, they give me things. I then don't look at it for about a month. So I've also stepped away. And then I go back and fix all the little things. So they'll have grammar, consistency things. I fix that first. And then I come back to the big picture things that they're talking about. So for instance, book 4, one of the things I'm actually doing is I have 2 plot points in parallel, which I have not tried in the others before. And I've now thinking how to weave them in closer, which means I'll have to do a lot of rewriting for the plot. So I finished the first draft of book 4. I haven't looked at it for actually 1.5 months. Now I have to dive back in and work this, right? So that's the process. How has that changed over time? I would say the academic writing really helps, because what I do is I actually read, and might be one of those mad writers who reads all their Goodreads and Amazon reviews. And now there are hundreds of them. And academics develop a thick skin, right? Because any paper you send, you will get brutal reviews. And I've seen a lot of writers say, never look at your Goodreads reviews, because you will either get elated or you will get very despondent. And it's true. Some people will say, look, I love the characterization in a story. And other ones will say, why can't she be more plot driven? I hate that she spends time on characters. So all of that is like up and down, very mixed. But what I guess academia teaches you is to take what can you use for revision. And so I'm always looking at that, saying, what can I actually use for revising this? So often there'll be a nugget. There was one, for instance, just to give you a sense, where there was one obscure review somewhere in my Goodreads which said, I am an English teacher and Nagendra overuses the word large. I said, I do. And I went back, and there were, in Murderer in the Red Moon, lots of large. Said, okay, I never knew that. This is something you don't know about yourself. So there'll be something like that. So I'm always reading that and trying to get a sense of what, I do. And I've recently discovered this fantastic software called Pro Writing Aid, which uses AI not to do anything else, but to tell you what do you overuse? So it went from that large thing. Then I said, okay, editors haven't clearly caught it. I haven't caught it. How do I find something? So pro writing it will actually tell you there was a string of 7 words. I forget what it was. Scratched her chin and maybe shrugged her shoulders. I'm just making this up. But it was something like that, some expression that I had used 3 times in the same book. And I said, oh, real clearly I have, and it's something a pattern of this, which is long enough that some reader would pick it up. So it does things like that. So I said, okay, this I will use AI for happily, and anything else I'm not going to touch it for because I really don't believe in it.
I am so happy that you brought up AI because this is something that, as professors, we would like our students to think about a little bit more. And I'll specifically ask you a question about how young people today should be thinking about the use of AI in writing, right? One is there are young people who are just coming into writing, and then there are students who are a little bit more, perhaps at an intermediate level at writing. How should one be thinking about this, at least when you enter academic space?
I would say to set it aside completely. I mean, that is my personal preference. I think one needs to really write. I mean, again, maybe old fashioned, but I would say the right act of writing paper and pen. That is a very different way of your brain associating. After that, now because I'm writing at speed, I have to move to typing. Right? There's no way I can get it done otherwise. But even if I had to write a poem, for instance, I would never write a poem on a type in a poem. If I have to write something more, in the poetic style, I would still do it pen and paper. And so, yeah, AI. My worry is it takes you in directions that's why I'm saying, so even personally after so many years of writing experience, I would never ever, I've seen writers that say, I will ask AI to come up with 10 different plots and then I'll take the plot and it's my creativity about how I enter it. But that starting point, I think, biases you very heavily. So you might, especially if you're young or intermediate, you might become a different kind of writer because of AI and you'll never have a chance to discover who you would be as a writer. I mean, for me, the biggest joy of writing has been the discovery process of who I am as a writer. Because I don't plan it. I like the surprise of saying, okay, this is where the story takes me. This is where my writing takes me. This is where I evolve. And I want that discovery. And I don't want somebody else to be discovering it.
Right, right. And again, you seem to be ending with words where I want to begin the next question that I had already planned. And this whole process of discovery is very interesting. And many people say, and for me as well, as someone who writes, writing is the place of discovery for me, both professionally and personally. What would it be for you?
It is the discovery. I mean, that's why, for instance, it's character driven because I think I am working through, I mean, I think all of us are working through things that trouble us, things that plague us, or things that are in the back of my mind. So, the non-fiction, as you said, is a lot of worry about where is the world taking us. And I try to do this in as optimistic a way. Both Seema and I always have this concern that we shouldn't scare people of the environment, but as optimistic a way as I want. But the murder mysteries, which are joyful murders, right, which is seems like a like an oddity, but is about finding a better world. Because at the end, there's always justice served. So, what kind of a world would be a good world? And there are things that I'm working through. One is it's just the beauty of 1920s Bangalore, immersing myself in that is a real discovery process. And I think, like I said about the circus, it takes me in directions. Now I'm writing about Coorg and plantations and the British view and the Indian view of plantations, labor rights, man-animal conflicts. It's a beautiful excuse to research all these obscure areas, right? So that's one part of the discovery. Another part of the discovery is the feminist right. So, and this is something I've written about before in my non-fiction pieces, right, tied to my fiction. Women's issues bother me a lot. So, and specifically with personal issues. So, my grandmother, my father's mother, died when she was 93. She knew Sanskrit, English, Hindi, Marathi, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, of course, because we're Kannadigas, right? And she could read and write in 4 languages. But she almost didn't get a chance to go to school. And she got married at 12 and had a bunch of children. And the usual story, but she got to go to school. Her father was a lawyer and he didn't get his girls go to school. Only the boys were educated. till her older sister, there was the sweetest thing when she was very old, where her sister and she were discussing this whole incident in front of us. And her sisters decided that they would go to school and grabbed her by the hand. So the 6-year-old and 4-year-old went off to the school. And the school teacher was worried because, there are these girls in a boys' school. So he came back home and he requested permission from the father, and they said they could study. So it's because of that that she could read and write. She read the newspaper. She was very much, well versed. But that was it. That's all she could do. She was very bright, but that was about the engagement she could do. Read the religious books, and the newspaper. My mother and mother-in-law both did their BSc, living in a hostel, doing botany in those days, fighting with their families. Both wanted to do other things. My mother got into a medical college, wasn't allowed to, had to get married. My mother-in-law got married even during her BSc, and she was 26 when she started her BSc because she went on hunger strike multiple times because they kept trying to discontinue her education after the 8th, the 10th, And that regret, end of the lives, this is the biggest regret, that I couldn't do something with it. So I guess that's something that worries me, because it's the hurt that I see them dealing with, and I think of how many millions of women across India are dealing with this. So writing is a way again of getting those struggles out and bringing those times. Yeah, so that's the discovery. I mean,
right, and I see that too in the fiction, the series, right? I think that's your tribute in a way to all the women as well, right? For all the voices that didn't get heard, even today, the voices that don't get heard. And I tremendously enjoy that bit because I think as women, all of us feel towards other women who perhaps don't have the access and the privilege that many of us. The So the other question I have, and I think this is again for the younger people who are venturing into writing. I think there's a lot of avenues today. There's social media, there's Instagram, there are Instagram writers, things like that. One tends to be very married to this, notion of the first draft, and it can't get any better than this sort of a thing. And when you send it to someone, which I think is a very important thing to do, a bunch of peers who'll read it and give you very honest feedback. So writing is also a process of honesty, I believe, right? So how important is that? How important is getting feedback about your writing, and what are the ways in which you can do this?
so for me, it's very important. It's been very important to get feedback, but it's also been very important to get the right kinds of feedback. So I used to write fiction before I wrote nonfiction. And I have written a couple of short stories for literary magazines that got published, and taken writing, one very brief writing class in Indiana University, which I never finished. But through the process of workshopping in these things, I found frankly not to be that useful, because if it's a whole class giving you feedback, there are a number of people who think very differently, which is very nice. But if you're young, it depends on how influenced you are. I used to get very influenced. So I would start with something that was a bit, it was odd, it didn't fit into anything, and I didn't have the confidence I have now to say, okay, this is my voice, I'm going to take it where it went. So it became more homogenized, and I feel like it lost its edge. It lost that thing that made it different. Which, it was raw, and there were probably things that needed to be fixed. So I think what I should have taken away from that feedback was there were things that needed fixing. Now, so again, it's, I guess, what you take back from. So feedback was important. What I would say is to find your tribe for that feedback. Find the people in that group. And this I've seen a lot of writers say, that they now have writers groups. And if you have that with people who think like you or who know how to give feedback, that's fantastic. So I think, which is also the role of the teacher, right? How do you give that feedback? That becomes very critical. So what I take away from feedback now is, if someone tells me that they dislike X part of my thing and I need to be doing this, I don't take away the I need to be doing this. I take away the fact that there's something about this that is not sitting right with them. So I need to do something. What that something is, I should decide.
Right.
I think that's where I think readers are really good at picking up. Something's not going well. This is jarring. This doesn't fit.
Right.
We need to smoothen that or integrate it.
Right.
But the Instagram part of it is very interesting, so Sharoon, because I was just thinking, we need to have so many different ways of creativity. And I think it's not one versus the other. Something I did, I think it's now close to a year ago. So my daughter and I play this game sometimes, where my sister and I used to play it when we were kids. You start with a story, you tell me 2 lines, and then I'll tell you the next 2 lines, and we just go on like this. it's fun because it goes into random places, right? It's a cool. So we did that about a princess who walked into a tomato. Why she walked into a tomato, I don't know. I've forgotten the rest of the story. But then I wrote it out and I tweeted the whole thing as a series of tweet threads, and it was a story. It was just fun. And I realized from reader interaction later that we should be probably doing things like this, not for anything else, but sometimes you want to write, you haven't had the time that week, and this is just a fun thing to
An inspiration to, keep it flowing, I suppose, right? Right. And, several people say that these smaller bits of writing that you do, perhaps not to contribute to a larger work that you're doing, is actually very key to your sustenance as a writer, right? Is that something that you do?
like I said, it's the itch. It's the feeling that, so sometimes because the daily work is a lot of things that are routine, right, in our daily work. And that can dull the edge of your creativity. So sometimes I feel I've been doing so many things through the day, but my brain hasn't been working. As in, I could have done them on semi autopilot, but the creative part of my brain hasn't been nourished. And then I feel because that week is just a busy week and I'm not going to get to anything else. And ideally, I would like, there's so many writing projects always sitting on, which is another. But sometimes when you write that, your brain sort of calms down. You've done something creative, it's got that satisfaction, and
It's like a craving, I think, and you just have to feed that. That's right. The I think the other important thing for one to understand is this whole world of publishing, right? It's of course a very pleasurable thing to write for yourself, but I think it requires a different kind of metal to really put yourself out there and say that I am ready for an audience to read my work, right? What is that like? Because many people are afraid of that.
So I was reading somebody's blog. I can't even remember who it was, an author, some 2-3 days ago. And she said, writing is a lonely task. And it's a really, people who are solitary tend to write, and people who are solitary tend to be, that was her characterization of it. And she said, and yet when I write, I find I'm very dependent on the praise I get from readers, and I'm devastated by the criticism. And she said, why? I was thinking about why that is, and she said it's because writing is storytelling, and storytelling requires an audience by definition, because it's not just you telling the story; it's how people receive that story. And I thought, okay, this is very interesting. So the process of writing is the solitary journey, but the process of publishing would be your equivalent of sitting on a stage and telling stories, or your grandmother telling stories around a fire, the storytelling. And that can be daunting for sure. I was lucky because I had already done because in some sense, the scientific writing part of it, and even my science writing, I started already after I was well into, like, let's say 20 years into my career, right? So it automatically makes you less nervous about what's coming next. That said, I think one thing I've realized is it's very important to have that thick skin, because reviewers are idiosyncratic, readers are idiosyncratic. What one loves, it's otherwise you're going to be in this roller coaster world. One day someone will email me to tell me they absolutely loved my book. It takes them back. They think it's the most amazing thing. I couldn't write fast enough. You'll be on cloud nine. Next day you read a book review on Goodreads or Amazon where someone savage and said this is the worst writing. This writer is mediocre. I wouldn't even, why have I paid money for this? So you can go into both things. So really, you have to develop that thick skin to not take it literally, and only, you had fun with the writing. You find people who, like, for me, the best thing is, someone who relates to it, because the Bangalore reader, like Bangi. That's when someone will tell me something like this and it's made my day. Because you're relating to it the way I wrote it, right? You're getting the memory that I had of the circus. And that to me is the best.
And here again, if you were to say, it is very human to feel you may have received 100 types of praise, right? But that one not so nice review uh, might get you down in a way where it's maybe a little difficult to get back up and start on that journey, because again, it's about that going back into that community of readers and presenting your work again, right? How do you, maybe insulate is a strong word, but how do you get back into that game, so to speak?
Especially for young people, because I think that thing I see is that younger people may, so I might be wrong in this characterization. I mean, it's a very broad and sweeping statement. But I think younger people today, because less of their interactions are personal and more are on social media, tend to be much less confident of themselves and much more prone to volatile reactions to criticism because social media is not a kind. And people are often saying the worst things to get those numbers of likes or to be provocative or to make that strong statement. And when you don't see them, you only have their words, and the words hurt. But when you see someone in an interaction, we've all had that. You have a heated debate, someone says something angrily, you shout back, and tomorrow you might be, really good friends again. Back to being friends. Doesn't matter. That interaction, we can see faces, read expressions in those conversations. So I think to me, the best antidote is to find a place where you can talk to your readers. The best times I have is when I do reader events at a bookstore signing or at some other place where I have a conversation with people. Those are what keep me going. Actually, frankly, those are really the things I completely live for because those times are absolutely fascinating. And people are always interesting and kind and nice when you talk to them one on one. It's only when they write on social media or leave something in writing, that is when it gets disconcerting. So that would be really, I think the way of insulation is to go meet people, meet your readers.
It's been so wonderful to have you with us, Harini. I mean, our students are lucky to have you here and come and talk to you. I think anytime that both of you can make time. But for a larger audience, I hope figuring out Harini's writing process and how she gets to writing not just fiction but non-fiction, even scientific material, will help you think through your own writing process and get better at it. Thank you, Harini. And we're in for the long haul. So we'll meet you again in the second episode. We'll discuss a little bit more about your books and other aspects about your writing.